All right. Well, welcome everyone to the webinar. CMMC is here. Now what? We really appreciate you joining us today. So I'm betting that everyone here has probably been hearing about CMMC for years, but this time it's different. The rules are final and enforcement has begun. So today we will cover the latest regulatory updates, the phased rollout, and the steps needed for compliance in time to compete on new and keep your existing DoD contracts. We'll also share the impacts across agencies other than defense, so you'll want to pay close attention to where that's going. Just a quick housekeeping note, we will have time at the end of the webinar for a live Q&A session, so please feel free to type your questions into the chat box and we'll answer as many as possible at the end. Okay, so on to our speakers. Joining us today for the webinar are Iviry's expert panelists. First up is David Cooper. Dave is the CEO of Iviry, and he is a Marine Corps veteran with decades of experience in the defense industrial base. Next up is Randy Delarme. Randy serves as Iviry's Chief Growth Officer, and he has spent his career helping organizations align technology investments with business growth. And finally, Adam Kangazer. Adam is a compliance analyst at Iviry, specializing in CMMC and NIST frameworks. He works with defense contractors to guide them through the technical details of compliance. Moderating today's discussion are Mia Jose, our cyber compliance coordinator. She supports client communications around initiatives, and myself, Tierney Curry, Iviry's Director of Marketing and Sales. I am also an Army veteran, and at Iviry, I focus on connecting defense contractors with the resources they need to stay secure and compliant. All right, and there is no one better to introduce Iviry than our CEO, Dave Cooper. Over to you.
Great, Tierney, thank you. And really great to be here today, and I'm glad so many people could join and spend a little bit of time today learning the latest of CMMC, and certainly some very big recent developments that we'll go through now. But just a little bit on Iviry and who we are. You know, first and foremost, we are a managed service provider, MSP, and we also have a SOC, so we're an MSSP as well. And what that means in plain terms is we provide data assurance, cybersecurity, and then really just kind of the tuning for performance of an IT ecosystem. Then we do incident response if there's unfortunately, sometimes there's an incident, and then compliance services, which is what we're here to talk about today. Now, our main customer is the defense industrial base. We've really focused on the defense industry now for over a decade. You can see in the picture there, kind of that focus on the DoD defense contracting community, and we go where the department goes, and that's some work that we did in Afghanistan years ago. But we're also kind of our latest markets are in Australia with AUKUS and the Philippines. So again, as I mentioned, we do have a compliance practice focused on CMMC. We are a registered practitioner organization with the CMMC AB, and so we got a lot of smart folks that understand the compliance world and how it relates. Again, so what that means in summary is we're a lot of technical folks. We have SMEs, sysadmins, and folks. So we don't just have clipboards. We have a lot of folks that really can get in under the hood and do the work. But anyway, again, very glad to have you here and look forward to spending a little time talking about the latest with CMMC. Tierney?
Thanks, Dave. All right, let's get started with where we are today in the CMMC compliance journey and why this time it's different. All right, so Adam, can you start us off with a clear explanation of the current regulatory landscape under 32 CFR?
Yeah, of course. So in this webinar, we're going to be focusing mainly on two of the titles in the CFR, specifically titles 32 and 48. We're going to talk more about 48 CFR in a little bit and the current timelines and changes going on there as far as the rulemaking process goes. But to answer your question, Tierney, the 32 CFR final rule, which went into effect December of last year of 2024, basically says, okay, this is what CMMC is. It is now set in stone. And then going forward with the 48 CFR, that's going to implement the actual CMMC certification requirements in those DoD contracts. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that timeline. But Dave, from a strategic perspective, what would you say contractors need to understand about the business impact of this regulation?
Thanks, Adam. I think, when you look at this chart, and there's a lot of dates on there, and a lot of things under the hood with both of these as CFRs, but kind of from a business perspective, I think from a couple of perspectives. And one is just impact on the current book of business that you have, and that future pipeline. From here on out, that compliance will be a barrier to entry for contracts. That'll be the gatekeeper, if you will. And I think another thing to keep in mind is very important is it's not just new contracts, but it's existing contracts and those options. And again, with the new rules coming into place, that KO can add those as we go. So again, I think from a business perspective, as you understand the potential impact on that current and future revenue, I think it's really doing an assessment of the type of work that you're doing and that you and your company wants to do. So again, the practical matter, do you need to be at level 1? Do you need to be at level 2 or 3 based on the type of work that you are doing or that you want to do as your company's growing? So I think with those components of your current book of business, current revenue, the plan on where you want to take your organization, then overlaying that based on the CFRs, then I think you can really understand what type of investment is going to be required, because it is a bit of an investment, even if you do a lot of it yourself. But getting compliant, going through the process itself of certification, and then the maintenance. So those are kind of the components I see of I think of as I look at the business impact here. Tierney?
Thanks, Adam and Dave. Adam, you made a really good point about compliance no longer being optional. And you're totally right. It's a legal requirement. And contracting officers are, we can see it now enforcing the standard. Adam, can you walk us through what a minimal passing score looks like under these new rules?
Yeah, so as it's defined in 32 CFR, there is a way to achieve a CMMC level 2 status without getting a 100% compliance, but they give some caveats there, and those are defined as having at least a score of 88 out of 110. And as you can see from this scale, it goes from 110 all the way to negative 203. And that is because there are some requirements that are worth more than 1 point. So some are worth 3, some are worth 5 points. So if you just keep that in mind, there's 1 point, 3 point, and 5 point controls. All of the 3 and 5 point controls need to be met, and that's another requirement to get what's called a conditional CMMC level 2 status. And then all of those items, all of the remaining items to get up to a 110 from an 88 need to be closed out within 80 days. There's also a few other items defined in 32 CFR. You have to have what's called an SSP, and that stands for a System Security Plan. And then all of the CMMC level 1 controls. So there's 3 levels of CMMC. The very first basic level, all of those controls need to be implemented, as there are a few of them that are worth 1 point. So if you meet all of these items and you close them out, all of the remaining items within 180 days, then that conditional CMMC level 2 status will then be upgraded to a full level 2 status, which lasts for 3 years instead of just 180 days there.
Thanks, Adam. I think you did a good job clarifying how the conditional status works. And if anybody has any questions about that, you can put it in the chat box too. And just a quick update on the broader rollout. The 48 CFR rule was under OMB review, but it's now cleared about a month ahead of schedule from what we expected. So it should hit the Federal Register within the next few days, Adam?
Yeah, so we're expecting by the end of this week.
Yep. So with that being said, can you walk us through what this means for contract enforcement once that is finalized?
Yeah. So the 48 CFR acquisition rule, this is going to incorporate the CMMC requirements directly into the DoD contracts. So once it actually gets approved and goes into effect, then it's going to flip the switch, and the contractors are going to need to demonstrate the compliance in order to be awarded those contracts, or just for getting paid. And it's also going to include the subcontractor flow down clauses. And that's going to make the primes responsible for ensuring that the subs comply. So this is going to move the CMMC from policy to an enforceable contract condition. So Randy, how's this going to affect the contractor's ability to really capture and maintain those contracts?
Randy, you're on mute.
Yeah, there's two things to keep in mind, Adam, here. First of all, is existing contracts and the ability to award modifications, follow-on options to contracts that exist today, and to stay, if you're a partner with a prime, to stay on that team and deliver. And so that's the first part of it. And then in terms of new work, these are going to be enforced, and it's now being enforced by contracting officers. And they're going to ensure that, like any other of the DFARS clauses, that you're compliant prior to award. And in many cases, you have to be compliant to submit even a successful RFP to be considered. The other last point is that with primes, with respect to new work, are going to be very discriminating, and they've already started to demonstrate that around what is your status, how ready are you for cybersecurity, and your ability to have a discriminator against your competition and be part of these teams that are going after new work is going to depend on your readiness.
Yep. Good points, Randy. Adam, back over to you. Do you expect any surprises when the final contract clauses roll out?
So there may be some sort of refinements that are going to require contractors to be more precise in their documentation and timing. But as far as this being a surprise, if we go all the way back to January 1st, 2018, that was the date that the DoD expected all their contractors to already have a full 100% implementation of NIST 800-171. And then this CMMC requirement, as we're seeing, that's going to be implemented in the 48 CFR and the DFARS, that's just going to be the certification requirements from a third-party audit or even a self-assessment that's going to say, okay, I'm certified, I have implemented 100% of this. So the core requirements have been here for a while. NIST 800-171, having an SSP, having a POA&M, that stands for Plan of Actions and milestones, and all of the subcontractor enforcement that goes along with these things. But as far as any other sort of technical surprises, like I mentioned, just maybe a few refinements about the contractor documentation and timing. But Dave, how can these companies really prepare to adjust their business strategies if any of these surprises do occur?
Yeah, Adam, thanks for that. And I didn't say earlier, I saw Jody is online from North Dakota, one of my good friends from the north. So just wanted to do a quick shout out to you, Jody. Thanks for joining us today. I think when it comes to surprises, particularly as a business owner, I kind of would bucket it broadly in kind of proactive positioning, and I can kind of break that down into kind of 5 pieces as you look at a program this big rolling out kind of across the DIB from the department. And first, I think is C-suite involvement. Again, this is not something that's an IT thing just in that department. I think that this belongs in the boardroom and the C-suite, because again, as these changes come out and as to kind of future-proof against those surprises, I think that's where the entire organization's leadership needs to be aware of what's coming, and then can better adjust to something that might change. Now, second, and I think equally important, is for every organization to have some relationship with an RPO, registered practitioner organization. Again, those are organizations that have RPs such as Adam with them. They understand the regulations, they understand, and they're part of a community of folks that are part of understanding how the controls are going to be scored, what the trends are, and I think can then better give advice. So even if you think you're going to do something yourself or have your internal team do a bulk of it, I think having an alignment with an RPO is critical, just like a tax advisor or something else at a minimum, because these are trained professionals and there's a lot of nuance at the technical layer. I think kind of third is just really that adoption of a formal risk management principles, kind of understanding what I'll take the word surprise and I'll kind of turn that into, what's an unknown variable that could happen. Likelihood, probability can kind of score that, but I think then you think through what those mitigations might be. And I think that advanced risk mitigation approach is helpful for any organization. And I think a fourth component is regular compliance checks. I got to understand where your ecosystem is. That's an evolving ecosystem as things are coming and going. It's a fluid environment. And just because it was good, 6-8 months ago, understanding where it is today is important, especially as the program, CMMC program is rolling out, and understanding where your ecosystem is relative to that. And finally, I think it's a mindset of being flexible. This is a huge program. It's not going to be without some kinks, but I believe in the goodness of the program. We've had too much intellectual property over the years that's gone abroad. We know the big five threat actors that are taking this information, and we take this seriously. So I think, regardless of some of the surprises or things that might come with the program, I think we as responsible defense contractors just need to be prepared for those and have that flexible mindset. So those are kind of 5 areas, Adam, I think comes to mind for me on how to be ready for that. Mia?
Thanks, Dave. So now we're going to walk through the CMMC implementation phases from 2025 to 2028. As we know, the phase rollout isn't just about the dates themselves, but it's also about knowing when your business will be expected to meet these specific key compliance milestones. So Adam, could you please break down the phase rollout and what each stage means technically?
Yeah. So as we're currently waiting on that 48 CFR final rule to take effect, once that the final rule actually does take effect, then phase 1 is going to start on that date. And as of right now, we're just estimating October 1st of this year, of 2025. So going from that estimation, phase 1 starts on October 1st and is going to last 12 months. During this time, all the contracts that are going to require self-assessments, that's going to be self-assessments for level 1, and also the level 2 self-assessments are going to include DFARS 7021. That's the clause that has that CMMC requirement. So you need to get that certification for those contracts that are going to need that requirement, so that you can actually be awarded that contract. Now, also another thing to note during this phase 1, as it's defined, they're going to require those self-assessments, but the contracting officer can also require you to get that third-party audit during phase 1, even though it's defined in phase 2 that's when the CMMC level 2 third-party audit requirement certification is going to be required. That can also take place in phase 1. So basically, moving forward to phase 2, it's going to start, let's say October 1st, 2026, if we're following the same estimated date, and that is going to also last 12 months, and that's going to require the third-party certification for CMMC level 2 for all those contracts that are going to have that as a part of the requirement for DFARS 7021. And then phase 3 is going to start October 1st, 2027. And this would start the requirements for CMMC level 3. And that's going to be a government-led assessment. So not an assessment led by a C3PAO or by a third party. It's going to be led by the government itself. And that's going to add additional requirements on top of that. And for phases 1, 2, and 3, there may be some leniency for basically pushing back that certification for exercising options periods. But for phase 4, there will be no leniency. You will need to get that CMMC certification at the level required for all new contracts and all existing contracts for those options periods to be exercised as well. So Dave, what is your perspective though on how the leadership should really align the business planning with these phases?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So again, I think most organizations probably on the line here, have a similar type of strategic, planning process. And I think kind of like we said a little bit earlier in the webinar, think a lot of this really, kind of comes down to, what's the current organization doing when you look at this, what the current products and services are that are offered, and an assessment, based on that current pipeline, current book of business. What's the data that supports those services and products and IP, et cetera? You're doing that data classification to understand, is your organization at a level 1 or a level 2 or a level 3 when it comes to the requirement, and then where do you want to be in your strategic plan? I think, again, a lot of us have business plans that are looking out, at least the next 3 to 5 years on where we're going. So that's one piece of the puzzle. The other, I think you'll see in another slide, but I'll kind of bring that forward. It's going to take any organization about 6 to 12 months to get ready to have an assessment, depending on where they are in their cyber journey. So you kind of couple that with these timelines that Adam just went over with these phases. That's when you can do that backwards planning and kind of align, again, where your organization's going, what level of that data applies to you, and then from a planning perspective, how long will it take realistically to be ready to be assessed, and then understand that you've got to get in a queue once that process begins, and that's going to be a big variable that we'll talk about in a minute. But I think those are the components, and then you can say to yourself, as a company, what's that investment that we need to make? Again, investing in a level 1 is a lot different than a level 2. And again, a lot of conversations I have with companies that, how much of their business is DoD business, how much do they want to be DoD business, and that's kind of that personal strategic planning for that organization. And then you can kind of lay that into here on the compliance projects that will be required, the people certification, and that IT infrastructure. Again, one other final point is I think that overall investment planning, investing correctly up front, can overall save some costs. And we'll talk about why that is here in another slide as we go through a next slide on what an implementation plan might look like. Mia?
Thank you for that business perspective, Dave. Adam, from a technical side, for a company that's starting now, is there enough time to prepare? And realistically, what is the timeline for readiness if a company starts today?
So that's also going to depend on the level, on the CMMC level that you're aiming to hit, or that you're expecting to need for your future contracts. But as Dave mentioned, the typical readiness efforts for CMMC level 2 is going to take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. We have seen some companies take 4 months. We have seen other companies take over a year, sometimes 2 years. So for CMMC level 2, and again, if we're going based off of the October 1st timeline, and we're talking about phase 2, when those CMMC level 2 requirements are going to hit the contracts, then we're expecting around October 1st of 2026. So you do have time to start now if you're expecting that. But also keep in mind, like I mentioned, the contracting officer can also require those third-party audit CMMC level 2 requirements during phase 1. So starting, say, October 1st of this year to October 1st of next year, you can still get that CMMC level 2 requirement, where you need to get that certification so that you can be awarded that contract. And then just going back to CMMC level 1, we're expecting that to hit starting October 1st of this year. So if you have DFARS 7021 in your contract and it specifies CMMC level 1, and that 48 CFR final rule hits the Federal Register and takes effect October 1st of this year, then you will need to get that CMMC level 1 certification to be awarded that contract, and then CMMC level 2 for October 1st of next year. So Randy, what's the business risk of really waiting too long, and how can an early preparation really benefit a company?
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, we talked about this already, but obviously there's risk in performance and maintaining your current contracts and risk of competing for new work. But the government mindset, and I think it's important to keep in mind, is that this is the audit part of requirements that we have all been attesting to for many years now. So they don't see the requirements specifically as new. What they see is their ability to formally audit those requirements. So that's kind of their mindset going in. But as a minimum, you've got to understand now what is your gap, put together a time phase plan, and execute that. And I think if you've got that message, it'll go a long ways towards working with partners and primes and the government. And there's an opportunity here as well to answer questions. Susan asked a question about training and contracting officers. And one of the things that they're looking for is something called your SPURS score. That's your supplier performance risk system. And you have to put your score in there. You have to attest to that. And contracting officers right now, and we've seen this with clients, they are looking at when does that score expire, so that you'll have to renew it. And now, what is that score? Because as Adam talked about, it's got to be in that 80% range. So the level of training contracting officers have probably minimal with respect to the technical requirements, but they know you have to have a score, and they know that there's an expiration date, and they're looking at that already. So staying in good stead with your government client and in good stead with your partners is really important to get this started now, understand where you are, and then lay out a plan that convinces them you can get to where you need to get to. Thanks.
Thanks, Randy. So when it comes to practical steps to prepare, we know companies are asking where to even begin. Adam, what would you say is the first critical step?
Yeah, so the first critical step, I would say, would definitely be start with a gap analysis against your organization using NIST SP 800-171. And just to clarify what NIST 800-171, that's the entire framework that is referenced in DFARS 7012. That's what CMMC was designed to certify that you have implemented NIST 800-171. It's a total of 110 security controls with 320 assessment objectives. Go through each one of those 320 assessment objectives to see where the gaps are, and then you can see where you stand as a part of your DFARS 7012 compliance, your CMMC framework implementation. So if you do have DFARS 7012, you need to have NIST 800-171 implemented. You have to have an SSP, which is a system security plan. You have to have a POA&M, that's your plan of actions and milestones. If you have DFARS 7019 and 7020 in any of your contracts, you gotta have an assessment with that SPURS score uploaded into SPURS. SPRS, that's another acronym. It stands for the Supplier Performance Risk System. So then once you do all of that and your DFARS 7012, 7019, 7020 compliant, you know exactly where you stand. Then you can actually move on to phase 2, where you can basically finalize your POA&M so that you can find a good path forward and a really good solution for how to close those gaps. And this is what Dave and I have discussed earlier. Can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months. That's just an average timeline. To really, generate and finalize all of your policies and documentation. Really generate like incident response plan and procedures. Do any sort of hardware upgrades, any sort of cloud migrations that are needed. All of these things can take time. They take a lot of resources. So definitely something to plan for. And then once all of those gaps are closed, you can move on to phase 3, cyber hygiene and sustainment phase, where you basically make sure that they stay closed over time, because again, that CMMC certification only lasts for 3 years. And there's going to be a lot of things in NIST 800-171 that are going to require annual review, annual updates, and things along those lines there.
All right, thank you, Adam. So for companies wanting to know how to scope and segment their environments, can you explain the best practices for doing this?
Yeah, so definitely step 1 would be generate a data flow diagram. So really figure out where CUI and FCI enters your organization. Where is it stored within your organization? Where does it bounce around to? Which groups or teams within the organization? And then how and where does it exit your organization? And that is going to give you what's called a data flow diagram. Once you have that, as well as a network diagram with all the hardware, software, any sort of applications that are in use that process the data, Then once you have both of those things, you can really figure out where you can reduce the scope and basically isolate CUI into dedicated enclaves or secure bubbles. And this is going to reduce the system scope. That's going to reduce your cost and your time to implement and to get to 100% compliance for that enclave. And it's also going to limit the audit complexity, and it's also going to minimize the time it's going to take to actually remediate all of these gaps.
Thanks, Adam. A common decision point for contractors is whether they should go at it alone or get outside help. So, Dave, from a business standpoint, how do you think they should make that call? How do companies decide whether to use internal resources or to bring in an RPO?
I think that calculus is something that a lot of organizations go through, and I think I'll start by answering that I really don't think it's an either or. I think, and I mean that kind of as a frame of reference, and then let me look first with that at the internal team and just some considerations. So I think when you ask yourself about your internal team, can they do this? Can they do this by themselves? As Mia asked, I think in terms of three perspectives: capacity, capability, and objectivity. And the first is the capacity. I mean, so most organizations, when they craft develop an IT team internal, it's based on the current environment, amount of seats, patching and all those things that they need to do, or that other provider that they've contracted with in order to optimize to take care of their IT architecture. When you throw something like CMMC on top of that, it's this huge project that you're now adding on top of that team, both in terms of hours, complexity, the POAM steps that Adam mentions there in phase 2 in order to get compliant and going through the program. So the point is, most teams don't have that extra capacity already built into them in order to do that, or there's not a really appreciation maybe of how much effort that might be that you'd be putting on the team. So that's capacity. And next is capability. And that's not to take away from any of the wonderful and the talented sysadmins that we have out there, across many of the organizations and ecosystem. There's a lot of very talented IT folks, but this program has its own nuance. How those controls are being applied, how that's supposed to be viewed from the perspective of the accreditation body, and some of those things. I think even the most savvy sysadmin would need some time to understand. In some cases, on some of the controls, on just how to implement the system. So that's just more to capability. And again, when you have a group of folks and that's all that they do, they can get very, very good at that from an external team. And finally, it's objectivity. I think in a lot of times, internal teams may not want or may not they have that natural bias. They might not be grading as hard as an external auditor might during the assessment. And that's certainly not when you want to find out that you're not compliant, or your IT and your controls aren't in alignment. That's actually one of the worst places. So those are three considerations when you're looking at your internal team: capacity, capability, and objectivity, to see if they could really do that. The other thing I want to point out on this slide is the resourcing of the POAM. Adam talked about going through phase 1, you get to a POAM. The organization is really in the driver's seat. It's not till that POAM is loaded with resources, cost, schedule, performance, who's going to do what, that it gets teeth. So my point there is kind of going back to the beginning. I think it's generally a hybrid model where how much do you want your internal resources to do, and how much do you want to outsource? I highly recommend everybody gets some sort of RPO on their team. From some capacity, but I think again, the savings that you can get by having some guidance through this process, even if you want to do a lot of it yourself, it goes a long way. So those are kind of the factors, Mia, that I think of me from a business perspective on when to get an outside team. But Adam, I'm kind of curious from your perspective, technically, what makes sense to you? Bringing an RPO in, at least from some of those technical controls that you've seen and had to deal with.
Yeah, I would say that it would make the most sense for a company that doesn't have a dedicated IT team, or say they do have a dedicated IT team, but they don't have any CMMC or NIST 800-171 compliance experience. then I think that this company could get a lot of value from bringing in an RPO that's also an MSP and has experience really, really turning the wrenches, doing all of those CMMC compliance tasks like implementing and also configuring FIPS validated firewalls, FIPS validated full disk encryption, doing the cloud migrations to a FedRAMP high environment or to a FedRAMP moderate environment, really installing and also configuring the endpoint detection and response software, all those types of things that are very important for CMMC compliance. I think that a company that fits that description would gain a lot of value from bringing in an RPO that's also an MSP that has experience doing these tasks.
Thanks, Adam. All right, well, we've been focused pretty heavily on government requirements, so let's shift the conversation towards the supply chain and subcontractor flowdowns. So over to you, Randy. What trends are you seeing in how primes are managing subcontractor compliance?
Yeah, thanks, Tierney. I think, first of all, like a lot of different proposal work that we do with primes over the years, they want to see it before they want to put it in front of their client. So they're kind of accelerating timelines for their partners and especially their small business partners to make sure that they're ahead of the timelines that their client is expecting, and they want to see those results before they're exposed to the government. So I think that's one area of this. And when they're selecting teams, they're going to go after those that are most ready and demonstrate the most capability to comply and meet these requirements. And it's kind of a significant burden. The government basically has said, we're going to enforce this with primes, and our primes are going to be accountable to enforce this with their subcontractors at every tier. So that's a big ask, and they're going to take that seriously and not risk the work that they have. The other thing in terms of reality check, there's memos online, and we can look at those. Here they are in front of you. You can find these online. But two big companies, Boeing and Lockheed Martin, sent these memos ahead of all of this about a month ago, just prior, like a day prior, to DoD making the big announcement on the due dates. And they sent it to their supply chain kind of as a warning order, but also as, hey, we're here to help to some degree. But they are taking this serious, and they understand that their performance and their ability to perform on a contract and get paid and win new work is going to be dependent on their entire team, not just them. So I think those are the most critical aspects of where we are with supply chain and the flow downs from primes to subs.
Yeah, and Randy, you make such a good point. I mean, we've been getting a lot of calls, I would say, in the last couple months of defense contractors or subcontractors to a prime saying, I've got a letter from my prime contractor. I've got to get compliant right now. And they feel rushed. So yeah, I think the time to start is right now. Dave, what risks do small suppliers face by delaying their compliance?
Yeah, I think as Randy and you just pointed out, particularly some of our partners, and we've got not these two particularly, we've got a lot of large companies as well that we work with directly, and that's where I'll start is again, you as an organization, especially small business, and that supply chain could be dropped by the primes. I mean they've got a compliance shop themselves, and they're not going to risk those very large contracts on things, and that partnership and stewardship that they're going to apply. So I think that's one of the easiest risks to see right out of the gate. I think the other thing is if you wait too long, again, you might be doing everything in your mind right, but everything takes longer in life than you think, and then by the time you're really ready to get your assessment, now you're stuck in the back of the line waiting for an assessor. Still not quite sure how the math is going to work out on as many companies as we have versus C3PAOs and assessment companies. So again, the net for an organization could be they're ready to go. They're think that their system is compliant, but they don't have a certification, and so then they're not going to be able to bid on a contract, or that prime is not going to take them on. And again, that's not the intent of the program, but I think there are going to start to be some situations like that, unfortunately, for those that wait. So there also is a potential loss of business for current work that folks have. Again, this isn't just new work, but it can be applied to out years and those option years. So don't forget that aspect of this. And I think both of all of those above lead to that cash flow pressure. And I think as the market gets strained, I think prices are going to go potentially up with some of the supply and demand. And then something I believe Randy hit on earlier, the False Claims Act, that still applies. And there's a lot of companies out there, and again, one of the genesis for the whole program is there's been a lot of folks that did self-attestation that when you really got under the hood wasn't accurate. I think again by waiting, that kind of bodes for those organizations as well that might not be in compliance. So on the other hand, I kind of turn the question around as well. Why wait? Well, at this point, why would one wait? I mean, I think it's just smart business to proceed. The CFR is now in place. And kind of one other anecdote again, Katie Arrington, who was the architect of the CMMC program in a previous administration, has been brought back by this Trump administration now to be the DoD CIO. So again, that just to me is an indicator and a strong signal that the program's not going anywhere with her leadership there. But I don't know, Randy, what do you think? How small businesses might mitigate their costs here as well? We talked about the risk, but what about the kind of cost offsets and advantage by starting early?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I think there's a couple of things. The longer you push this off, the greater your total cost is going to be as the demand starts to be increased in the marketplace for see-through PAOs and RPOs. We're going to run out of the number of companies that can actually do that, and there's going to be a premium for that if you wait too long and you get into crunch time. So total cost is one of those areas where you pay, but also, and as we all know, cash flow is king among our businesses, and it's not just how much does it cost, but when do I have to pay? And so the more you crunch the timeline, the less influence you can have over how to time phase a budget, the worse it's going to be. So I think those are the main points there, is that your total cost can come down, and the period over which you can budget and spend those resources will increase if you get started early and take it serious. And I think it's another point that Dave raised earlier, is this is a C-suite issue. The investment required is going to take those kind of decisions. It's your IT team may implement the technical controls, but it's a whole of business to some degree task, because a lot of this is documentation, and what is in the heads of your people that could answer the questions to an auditor now has to be codified, and it has to be on paper. And at times that can be difficult, and it requires really the commitment on the part of company leadership to make it a priority across the board to get it done, and then to approve the budget to implement. So I think that's my thoughts on that, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave and Randy, really good points, and thanks for sharing. Adam, beyond DoD, are other agencies looking at adopting CMMC or other similar frameworks?
Yes, and there's actually currently a proposed rule in the FAR, which is Chapter 1 of Title 48 in CFR. FAR just stands for Federal Acquisition Regulation, and this rule is actually proposed by the Department of Defense, GSA, which is the General Services Administration, and NASA, and it goes into how are you expected to protect CUI. And this is outside of the DFAR, so outside of just the DoD. So this is going to be more so agency, or government-wide. And we are expecting a lot of other agencies to really follow suit as well. We see the Department of Homeland Security in there as well. So this is definitely showing that the compliance maturity is going to start to become a government-wide baseline and not just the DoD requirement. So, Randy, what are your thoughts though on the port cybersecurity and their adoption of CMMC-like frameworks?
Yeah, certainly related, and it relates to, the message that you've got that this is going beyond DoD. I think a lot of agencies across the federal government have saying, okay, they're willing to invest the time, money, figure out what works, what doesn't work, get their plan finalized, and then there's going to be a lot of follow-on, I think, adoption, at least to some degree, by agencies across the board. The Coast Guard and Department of Homeland Security are now implemented a program. The rule was passed in January and became effective July 16th of this year, around port security and the standards for U.S. ports to meet around cybersecurity requirements. And having visited many of these sites, Dave has, I have, the team has, in the past, when they were doing their inspections and doing their walkthroughs and their audits at the port, it was a 5-minute conversation around IT. Yeah, everything's fine. We're doing great. Let's move on. That is no longer the case. In this particular framework, the Coast Guard has been given the task to audit and enforce the rules, but the ports and the port authorities have the requirements. And so it's just another, I'll say, trend within the broader marketplace of this becoming more formalized and engaging in not only requirements, but the audit and inspection of those requirements. Thanks, Adam.
All right, thank you, Randy. So thank you very much to our panelists for sharing your valuable insights. We're now going to move into the Q&A segment. So we've set aside about 5 minutes for this, and we'll be answering the questions you all have been sending in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can. So I'll start with, if we already self-attested under DFAR 7012, what additional work does CMMC require? Adam, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. So if you've already self-attested under DFAR 7012, that basically just means that you have a POAM stating that you know what your current deficiencies are against NIST 800-171, and you have an SSP and you have that assessment, right? So CMMC is just going to require that you're certified that you have all of those things implemented, but it's going to, as we talked about, the minimum CMMC requirement is going to be the conditional status, at least for CMMC level 2. So you're going to need to first do a gap analysis, and if you're already compliant with DFAR 7012, then that means that you already have a gap analysis done, you have a POA&M, so you know the deficiencies. So then you just want to get up to that minimum level so that you can achieve the conditional CMMC status, and then go all the way to get the full CMMC level 2 status so that you can get certified there.
Thanks, Adam. Dave, how can small defense contractors start with CMMC when it all feels so overwhelming on both time and budget constraints?
Yeah, I think the perspective is it's a journey, and it's not going to happen overnight. And I think also recognizing that it's a special type of a program that's going to require, again, as we said, some of the C-suite is good to kind of understand that magnitude. And then the next is simply getting that RPO, I believe, and that expert that can come in and give confidence in detail, and has done it before, frankly, for other organizations, that can kind of give that comfort and takes away that overwhelming feeling and replaces it with a plan, a phased approach, and kind of breaking this down. And again, just because you're getting an outside expert doesn't necessarily mean that those costs go skyrocket. I think and you're in the driver's seat as an organization, and that's when I think you get a schedule and a budget and a timeline that meet your organization's plan. Because if we all recognize, as does the government, that you're still trying to run your business, and this can't take over, you're going to have to implement this program while you're continuing to conduct business operations. But overall, I think getting that right hand person to come in and help that RPO, I think is the short answer. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. Randy, have we seen increased contracting officer training on CMMC requirements and proper implementation?
Yeah, so I mentioned this before. Right now, what the contracting officers are doing is they're looking at the SPURS score. In the past several months, they've been looking primarily at the expiration date. And is that going to expire during the period of performance of a particular contract year? And if so, they're going directly to their vendor and telling them, hey, you've got to get this updated. If it's already expired or expires in the very near term, in the next 30, 60 days, they're saying, you've got to have it updated before I will award the option, and time is running out. So they're not getting detailed training, but they do understand the score. They understand the timeline and what that means. I think the other point to make is that, believe it or not, the government probably has left this clause out of some contracts that probably should have had it. And that was a matter of putting it together. But now with the law and the passage of this and CMMC, contracting officers are being held accountable to say you cannot award a contract, you cannot award an option without these clauses in play as appropriate. And so they're taking on now that burden and putting their warrant at risk, not following those rules. So I think we're going to see more of it as we go forward. But they know enough to understand what is required in terms of the score, the timing of it, and moving forward. How does that play into the timeline of the schedule for delivery?
All right, thank you, Randy. Dave, this is a leadership question. What is a realistic approach for our leadership to take when factoring compliance costs into their budgets without disrupting other mission priorities?
I think again, the unfortunate piece is IT and compliance generally are against the bottom line. They are G&A costs, even though some of them can be written off or amortized. But the reality is, again, as Randy said in an earlier segment, we as the DIB have supposed to be doing this for many years, coming into this. So at some point, it's just kind of that cost of doing business if you want to be in the DIB. And again, I think we've seen so much intellectual property lead the country to go to our adversaries that we know that we need to do this. So I think again, that strategic planning, take some action now to get it into the budget for next year, 26, based on where you're at now, or what can be done in current year. Some of it can be phased in, and I think again having that partner can help phase that into your fiscal planning. It is important, but ultimately it is against the bottom line. It is against G&A, and it can be hard to make that jump depending on where you are in your journey.
Adam, how does bifurcation of level 2 self-assessment versus third-party assessment work?
Yeah, so we've talked about how there's 3 levels of CMMC, but there's 4 ways to certify, right? There's a level 1, which is always a self-certification. There's level 2, which could be both, or it could be either a self-assess or a third party, and then level 3 is the government-led assessment. So for level 2, the reason why there's 2 ways to get a level 2, one is self-assess, one third party, is it's currently defined that for the level 2 self-assessment, that's going to be for any company that is dealing with CUI that's not in the Defense Organizational Index grouping in the NARA CUI registry. So if you Google NARA CUI registry, you're going to be taken to a site that has a bunch of different what's called organizational index groupings, one of which is the defense. So for the Department of Defense, there's 5 or 6 different categories of CUI there. If it's not in one of those 5 or 6 categories, then it can be self-assessed. And again, this is going to be up to the contracting officer. If it is If it is within that defense organizational index grouping, then it must be a third-party assessment for CMMC level 2.
Thanks, Adam. Okay, so we're gonna have to end our Q&A here. Thank you all for your participation. Randy and Dave, we'd love to hear your key takeaways from the webinar.
Yep. So I'll start. It's here. We've been hearing about it for years and years, but it's really here now, and there's a lot of risk with non-compliance. I think if I summarize this, the first thing you got to do is understand where you are. What are your gaps? It isn't that you don't have any, but you need to really understand where those are, what it's going to cost, and how long it's going to take, and then you can start to plan. Early compliance is clearly going to be a competitive advantage. It's going to be a competitive necessity with the government. It's going to be a competitive advantage with your primes, and could ultimately be a necessity with them, depending on their level of patience and tolerance for this, and how they want what risk they want to take moving forward. And so the other thing is, once you understand where you are, put together a time-phased budget, work it into your planning cycle, and execute that plan. So I'll end there, and Dave, turn it over to you to close it.
I'll put a very clean message to our participants. And again, thank you everyone for joining, and really want to thank the team for pulling this together and sharing some valuable insight. I think it's extremely important topic. But there's 3 takeaways for you back to your organizations. I think it's 1, the rules are in place now, and 2, it's time to act. It's here, as we said. And finally, I would just highly recommend that if you don't already, to get an RPO on your team to give you good advice and partner with you to be sure that you get your compliance journey meets your business goals. But again, thank you for that, and we'll turn back over to me and Tierney.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Randy. So on behalf of our panelists, thank you all for joining us today. We'll be sharing the webinar recording, a Q&A document, and some additional resources with you all shortly. Tierney and I, as you can see, have our contact information on the screen, but we'll follow up with each of you. And if you have any follow-up questions, if we didn't get to your question today, you can email marketing@iviry.us, which I put in the chat. So thanks again to everyone for being here, and this officially concludes our webinar.
Thanks, Mia. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.